The last thing Ethan Kirkland saw before the flames consumed his world was the photograph of his parents hanging crooked on the wall, the glass already splintering from the heat. He had been sleeping in the back room of his general store in Madisonville, Texas, when the smell of smoke jerked him awake, and by the time he stumbled into the main room, the entire front half of the building was already ablaze. The kerosene lamps he had been repairing the night before must have tipped over, or maybe it was the faulty chimney he kept meaning to fix. It did not matter now. The fire moved like a living thing, hungry and merciless, devouring everything he had spent the last 6 years building since he was 18 years old. He barely made it out alive, crashing through the back door in nothing but his nightclothes, his lungs burning from the smoke. He collapsed in the dirt behind the building, coughing so hard he thought his ribs might crack, watching helplessly as the orange glow lit up the pre-dawn sky. The summer of 1878 was already scorching hot, and the dry timber of his store went up like kindling. By the time the bucket brigade formed, there was nothing left to save. The building crumbled in on itself with a sound like thunder, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky. Ethan stayed on his knees in the dirt long after the flames died down, long after the concerned townspeople stopped offering him water and blankets, long after the sun came up and revealed the full extent of his loss. Everything. The store his father had helped him establish before dying of fever. The living quarters where his mother's quilt still covered the bed. The stock he had just received from Fort Worth. The money he had been saving to expand. The daguerreotype of his parents. All of it gone, reduced to ash and twisted metal. He was 24 years old and he had nothing. The next 3 days passed in a blur of gray. The town doctor, old Marcus Fleming, insisted Ethan stay at his house to recover from the smoke inhalation, but Ethan could barely hear the man's words over the roaring emptiness in his head. He sat in the doctor's spare room and stared at the wall. He ate when food was put in front of him. He slept fitfully, dreaming of fire. The few belongings people brought him, donated clothes and a borrowed hat, felt like they belonged to someone else. On the 4th day, he returned to what was left of his store. The lot was still warm, the ash shifting under his boots as he walked through the ruins. The brick chimney stood like a gravestone among the debris. Ethan picked up a piece of charred wood and it crumbled in his hand. He could not even identify what it had been. A shelf, a door frame. He felt hollowed out, scraped clean. That was when he saw her. She was standing at the edge of the ash, a woman he had never seen before, wearing a simple gray dress and a bonnet that shaded her face from the brutal Texas sun. She held a canvas bag in one hand and she was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Not pity. Something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. Ethan straightened up, suddenly aware of how he must look. Covered in soot, wearing borrowed clothes that did not fit right, standing in the ruins of his life like a ghost haunting his own grave. "Can I help you?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw from smoke and disuse. The woman stepped forward, her boots crunching through the ash. As she got closer, he could see her face clearly. She was young, probably close to his own age, with dark hair pinned back severely and eyes the color of amber. There was something fierce about her, something that made her seem larger than her small frame suggested. "My name is Beatrice Jensen," she said. Her voice was clear and steady. "I am a carpenter." Ethan blinked at her. "A carpenter?" "Yes." She set down her canvas bag and pulled out a small notebook and a pencil. "I heard about your fire. I want to help you rebuild." He almost laughed, but it would have come out bitter. "I appreciate the offer, madam, but I cannot pay you. I cannot pay anyone. I have got nothing left." Beatrice looked at him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face. Then she knelt down in the ash, right there in her gray dress, and began sketching in her notebook. "Tell me what the building looked like before." "Madam," I just said. "I heard what you said." She did not look up from her sketch. "I am not asking for money. I am asking what the building looked like." Ethan stared at her. A hot wind blew through the ruins, lifting ash into small spirals. "Why would you do that?" She finally looked up at him. "Because I know what it is like to lose everything. Because I know what it is like when people walk away instead of walking toward you. Because I can." She tapped her pencil against the notebook. "Now, are you going to stand there arguing with me, or are you going to tell me about this store?" Something in her tone, matter of fact and unshakable, cut through the fog that had surrounded Ethan for days. He found himself sitting down in the ash beside her, and then, haltingly at first, he began to talk. He told her about the dimensions of the building, the layout of the shelves, the placement of the windows. As he talked, her pencil moved quickly across the paper, creating lines and angles that slowly began to resemble what he had lost. She asked detailed questions. How wide were the floorboards? Where did the light come in best? What about storage in the back? They sat in the ruins for over an hour, and for the first time since the fire, Ethan felt something other than emptiness. He felt the faint stirring of something that might, eventually, become hope. When Beatrice finally closed her notebook, she stood and brushed the ash from her dress. "I will be back tomorrow morning at first light. We will start clearing the debris." Ethan got to his feet. "You did not think I was going to do this alone, did you?" She picked up her canvas bag. "This is your store, Mr. Kirkland. You are going to rebuild it. I am just going to show you how." "I do not even know you," Ethan said, but there was no accusation in his voice, only bewilderment. Beatrice smiled for the first time, and it transformed her fierce face into something warm. "Then I suppose we will get to know each other, tomorrow, first light." She started to walk away, then paused and looked back. "And Mr. Kirkland, bring gloves if you have them. This is going to be hard work." She left him standing in the ash, holding a feeling he had almost forgotten: purpose. That night, Ethan lay awake in the doctor's spare room, thinking about the woman who had appeared out of nowhere. Beatrice Jensen, a carpenter. He had heard of women taking up trades, especially out here on the frontier where survival mattered more than propriety, but he had never met one. There was something about her that unsettled him in a way that had nothing to do with her profession. The way she had looked at him, like she could see straight through all his defenses. The way she had knelt in the ash without hesitation. The certainty in her voice when she said she would help him. He finally fell asleep wondering what had happened to make her understand loss so well. The next morning, Ethan was at the ruins before the sun came up. He had borrowed gloves from Dr. Fleming and wore the most practical of his donated clothes, ready to work. He half expected Beatrice not to show up. Maybe yesterday had been some kind of fever dream, his smoke-damaged mind conjuring hope out of desperation. But as the first pink light touched the horizon, she appeared, walking down the dusty main street of Madisonville with her canvas bag and a tool belt slung around her waist. She wore a different dress, this one brown and even more practical than yesterday's, with the sleeves already rolled up to her elbows. "Good," she said when she saw him. "You are early, I like that." They worked as the town woke up around them. Beatrice showed him how to sort through the debris, identifying what could be salvaged and what needed to be hauled away. She moved with practiced efficiency, her hands quick and sure. They barely spoke, falling into a rhythm of work that required few words. By mid-morning, several townspeople had stopped to watch. Ethan recognized Bill Thompson, who ran the saloon, and Mary Garrett, the seamstress. Their faces showed open curiosity at the sight of a woman working alongside Ethan in the ruins. "Kirkland," Bill called out. "You need some help there." Ethan straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead. Before he could answer, Beatrice spoke. "We could use some strong backs to haul debris if you are offering," she said calmly. "The more help we have, the faster we can clear this lot." Bill looked taken aback at being addressed so directly by a woman he did not know, but something in Beatrice's straightforward manner seemed to win him over. He nodded. "I will round up a few boys. We will be back after lunch." True to his word, Bill returned with 4 other men and the work went faster. Beatrice directed them like a general directing troops, pointing out what needed to go where, how to stack the salvageable bricks, where to pile the scrap metal. The men followed her instructions without question, responding to the authority in her voice. As the sun began to set, the lot was nearly cleared. Ethan stood looking at the empty space, the earth scarred and blackened but ready for something new. His whole body ached, his hands were blistered even through the gloves, but he felt more alive than he had in days. "Same time tomorrow," Beatrice said, packing up her tools. "We will start laying the foundation." "Beatrice," Ethan said, and she turned to look at him. "Thank you, I mean it. I do not understand why you are doing this, but thank you." Her expression softened. "You will understand eventually," she said quietly. "Get some rest, Ethan. Tomorrow will be even harder." She used his first name so naturally it took him a moment to register it. By the time he thought to say something, she was already walking away, her tool belt clinking softly with each step. Over the next week, Ethan learned more about building than he had ever thought possible. Beatrice was a patient teacher, explaining as she worked, showing him how to measure and cut, how to check that corners were square, how to read the land for drainage. Her hands, small and calloused, moved with absolute certainty. She had clearly been doing this for years. They fell into a pattern. They worked from first light until the heat became unbearable, took a break in the shade of the oak tree across the street, then worked again until sunset. Beatrice brought lunch for both of them, simple food wrapped in cloth. They ate mostly in silence, too tired for conversation, but it was a comfortable silence. On the 8th day, as they were setting the foundation stones, Ethan finally worked up the courage to ask, "How did you learn to do this?" Beatrice did not look up from the mortar she was mixing. "My father was a carpenter. He taught me when I was young." "Where is he now?" "Dead." The word was flat, final. "Fire took him too, and my mother and my 2 younger brothers, 5 years ago in Louisiana." Ethan's hand stilled on the stone he was positioning. "Beatrice, I am so sorry." She shrugged, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "They were trapped in the house. I was in town buying supplies. By the time I got back, it was over." She finally looked up at him, and her amber eyes were fierce with old pain. "So yes, Ethan. I know what it is like to stand in the ashes. I know what it is like when everything is gone. Is that why you came to Texas? Could not stay in Louisiana? Too many ghosts." She went back to mixing the mortar. "I have been traveling for the past few years, going where the work is. Heard Madisonville needed builders, so I came here. Got here 2 days before your fire." They worked in silence for a while. Ethan thought about her arriving in a new town, alone, ready to start again. He thought about her seeing his fire and recognizing something in it in him. A kindred spirit in loss. "I am glad you came here," he said quietly. Beatrice glanced at him, and for just a moment her fierce expression cracked open to show something vulnerable underneath. "So am I," she said. As the foundation took shape, people in town began to take notice of what was happening. Some were supportive, stopping by with water or words of encouragement. Others were more skeptical, particularly of Beatrice. Ethan overheard whispers about the propriety of an unmarried woman working so closely with an unmarried man, about whether a woman could really know carpentry, about what kind of woman traveled alone. Beatrice seemed utterly unbothered by the gossip. She worked with the same focused intensity regardless of who was watching or what they were saying. Ethan found himself admiring that about her, the way she simply did not care what people thought. She knew her own worth, her own skill, and that was enough. But the whispers got to him. One evening, as they were packing up for the day, he brought it up awkwardly. "People are talking about us, about you." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "Let them talk. It does not bother you, why would it? They are not building your store, we are." She coiled up a length of rope and stowed it in her bag. "People always talk about what they do not understand. I stopped listening years ago." "Still," Ethan persisted, "I do not want your reputation damaged because of me." She laughed, a sharp sound. "My reputation?" "Ethan, I am a woman who works with her hands, who travels alone, who does not have a husband. My reputation was never going to be spotless in the eyes of people who care about such things." She looked at him steadily. "The question is, does it bother you?" "No," he said immediately and realized it was true. "No, it does not bother me at all." "Good." She picked up her bag. "Then we have no problem." By the end of the third week, the frame of the building was up. Ethan stood back one evening, looking at the skeleton of his new store, and felt emotion well up in his throat. It was really happening. He was rebuilding. Not alone, but with someone who understood. He turned to tell Beatrice and found her already watching him. There was something in her expression that made his heart skip. "It is going to be better than before," she said softly. "Stronger. I promise you that." "I believe you," Ethan said, and he meant it. That night he lay awake again, but this time his thoughts were not about what he had lost. They were about the woman with amber eyes who had walked through the ashes to help him. About the way her face softened when she smiled. About the competence of her hands and the steadiness of her presence. About how the past 3 weeks, despite the hard work and grief, had contained moments of something that felt dangerously close to happiness. He was falling for her. The realization should have terrified him, but instead it felt right. Natural. Like something that had been building since the moment she knelt in the ash beside him. The question was, did she feel the same way? The next day brought a setback. One of the main support beams they had erected was not quite right. Beatrice spotted it during her morning inspection, and though Ethan could not see the problem, she insisted they take it down and redo it. "If we leave it, the whole structure will be unstable," she explained, already preparing to dismantle their work. "I know it is frustrating, but it has to be right." Ethan helped her take down the beam without complaint, but by midday, the heat and exhaustion were getting to him. His hands slipped on the wood and the beam crashed down, narrowly missing Beatrice's foot. "Damn it!" Ethan threw down his gloves. "I am sorry. I'm not good at this. I am a shopkeeper, not a carpenter. Maybe this whole thing is a mistake." Beatrice set down her hammer and walked over to him. She took his hands, turning them over to look at the blisters and calluses that were forming. "These hands have learned more in 3 weeks than most people learn in 3 months. You are not a shopkeeper anymore, Ethan. You are a builder, and you are good at it." The feeling of her hands on his sent a jolt through him. She was standing close, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes, close enough to smell the scent of sawdust and soap that clung to her. "I could not do this without you," he said, his voice low. "Yes, you could," she said, "but you do not have to." They stood there for a long moment, hands still touching, and Ethan could feel the air between them charge with something electric. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it so badly his chest ached with it, but Beatrice stepped back, breaking the contact. "Come on," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. Let us get this beam reset before the day gets any hotter." They worked the rest of the day in a new kind of silence, one that hummed with awareness. Every time their hands brushed passing a tool, every time their eyes met, Ethan felt that electric charge again. He knew she felt it too. He could see it in the flush on her cheeks, the way she seemed careful not to stand too close. That evening, as they were cleaning up, Ethan made a decision. "Beatrice, would you have dinner with me tonight? Not here, not working. A real dinner." She looked surprised. "Where?" "There is a restaurant, Turner's. Nothing fancy, but the food is good." He felt nervous, like a kid asking a girl to a dance. "I know we have been spending all our time together anyway, but I would like to spend time with you not covered in sawdust. If you want." A smile spread across her face, soft and genuine. "I would like that very much." Turner's restaurant was small but respectable, run by a widow named Helen Turner and her adult daughter. When Ethan and Beatrice walked in that evening, freshly washed and wearing their best clothes, several heads turned to watch them. Ethan ignored the stares, leading Beatrice to a table by the window. She had let her hair down and it fell in dark waves past her shoulders. She wore a dress he had not seen before, deep blue, and he could not stop staring at her. "What?" she asked, a hint of self-consciousness in her voice. "You are beautiful," he said simply. She blushed, actually blushed, and looked down at her hands. "I clean up all right. More than all right." They ordered food, but Ethan barely tasted it. He was too focused on talking to Beatrice. Really talking. Not about measurements or materials, but about their lives. She told him about growing up in Louisiana, about learning carpentry at her father's side, about the prejudice she faced as a woman in a man's trade. He told her about his parents, about building the store with his father, about his dreams of expansion that had burned with the building. "What will you do with it now?" Beatrice asked. "Now that you are rebuilding," Ethan considered. "I want it to be more than just a store. I want it to be a place people gather. Maybe add a lending library in the back. My mother always said a town needs books as much as it needs nails and flour." Beatrice's eyes lit up. "I love that idea. We could build in shelves, make a reading corner." She started sketching on her napkin, her enthusiasm infectious. "If we extend the back wall by another 8 feet, we—" Ethan interrupted gently. She looked up, caught. "I mean, if you want, I just thought I want," he said firmly. "Beatrice, I want you to stay after the store is done. I want you to stay in Madisonville, with me." Her eyes searched his face. "Ethan, what are you saying?" "I am saying that the best thing to come out of that fire was you walking through the ash to help me." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I am saying that I have not felt this way about anyone before. I am saying that I do not want this to end when the building is finished." Beatrice's eyes were bright with tears. "I have been trying so hard not to hope for this," she whispered. "I thought maybe I was imagining it, what I felt." "You are not imagining anything." He squeezed her hand. "I am falling in love with you, Beatrice Jensen. Maybe I have been since the first moment you knelt in the ashes beside me." A tear spilled down her cheek, but she was smiling. "I think I started falling for you when you finally stopped arguing and started talking about your store, when I saw the passion come back into your eyes." "Is that a yes?" Ethan asked. "Will you stay?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will stay." He wanted to kiss her right there in the restaurant, but he was aware of the watching eyes around them. Instead, he stood, still holding her hand, and led her outside. The sun had set, and the Texas sky was streaked with purple and gold. They walked away from the main street, toward the quiet area where the church stood, under the spreading oak tree beside the church, with no one watching. Ethan finally cupped Beatrice's face in his hands and kissed her. She melted into him, her arms coming up around his neck, and the kiss was everything he had imagined and more. She tasted like hope and new beginnings, like strength and softness combined. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," she whispered back. They stood there under the oak tree for a long time, holding each other, and Ethan thought about the strange paths life takes. How loss can lead to love. How destruction can lead to creation. How the worst day of his life had somehow led to this moment, this woman, this overwhelming feeling of rightness. The next morning they returned to work on the store with renewed energy. But now everything was different. Now, when their hands touched, it was deliberate. Now they stole kisses when no one was watching. Now they talked not just about the building, but about the future. Their future. The town noticed the change between them. Some people were supportive, like Dr. Fleming, who clapped Ethan on the back and told him he was a lucky man. Others were more critical, particularly a few of the older women who thought Beatrice was too forward, too unconventional. One afternoon, Mrs. Sarah Montgomery, the banker's wife and self-appointed guardian of Madisonville's morality, came by the construction site. She watched them work for a few minutes, her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Mr. Kirkland," she finally said, "might I have a word?" Ethan climbed down from the ladder he had been on. "Of course, Mrs. Montgomery." She glanced at Beatrice, who was measuring out lumber, then back at Ethan. "I feel it is my duty to express some concern about your situation here. This woman, Miss Jensen, her presence here is causing talk." "Is it?" Ethan kept his voice level. "Yes. It is not proper for an unmarried woman to be working so closely with an unmarried man. And for you to be courting her so publicly, when you barely know her, with respect, Mrs. Montgomery," Ethan interrupted. "I know Beatrice better than I have known anyone. She has shown me nothing but kindness and skill. She has given her time and talent to help me rebuild when she could have demanded payment I cannot give. If people want to talk about that, let them. But I will not hear a word against her." Mrs. Montgomery's eyes widened. "I am only thinking of your reputation. My reputation is my own concern." Ethan softened his tone slightly. "I appreciate your care for the town's morality, madam, but Beatrice Jensen is the finest woman I have ever met. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." Mrs. Montgomery huffed and walked away. Ethan turned to find Beatrice watching him, a soft smile on her face. "My hero," she said, but there was genuine warmth in her voice. "I meant every word," Ethan said. "I know you did." She set down her measuring tape and walked over to him. "But Ethan, she is not entirely wrong. We should probably think about propriety. Not because I care what people think, but because you have to run a business in this town. You need these people as customers." Ethan pulled her close, right there in broad daylight. "Then we will just have to get married." Beatrice went still in his arms. "What, marry me?" He pulled back to look at her face. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for 5 weeks. But I also know that I love you and I want to build a life with you, not just a store." "Marry me, Beatrice." Her eyes searched his face for a long moment. Then she started laughing, bright and joyful. "Yes, yes, you crazy man, I will marry you." He spun her around, both of them laughing now, and when he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, not caring who saw. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church, with half the town in attendance. Beatrice wore a dress that Mary Garrett, the seamstress, had made for her, cream-colored with delicate embroidery. She had flowers in her hair, wildflowers that Ethan had picked that morning. He wore his only suit, borrowed from Dr. Fleming, and he could not stop smiling. The ceremony was simple. Reverend Thomas, a kind man in his 50s, led them through their vows. When Ethan said, "I do," his voice was strong and sure. When Beatrice said, "I do," her amber eyes were filled with tears of happiness. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Thomas said. "You may kiss your bride." Ethan did, to the applause of the congregation, and thought that this was better than any dream he could have imagined. The town threw them a small reception in the community hall. People brought food and drinks, and there was even a fiddler who played dancing music. Ethan waltzed with his new wife, both of them a bit clumsy but not caring, and he felt like the richest man in Texas. Bill Thompson from the saloon came up to congratulate them, slightly drunk but sincere. "You are a lucky man, Kirkland. That woman of yours, she is something special." "I know it," Ethan said, watching Beatrice laugh at something Mary Garrett had said. "And stubborn as a mule from what I have seen," Bill continued. "You two are going to do just fine together." Later, when they were finally alone in the small house Ethan had rented for them, Beatrice unpinned her hair and turned to look at her husband. "So, Mr. Kirkland, what now?" Ethan crossed the room to her. "Now we finish building our store and then we build our life. In that order?" she asked, smiling. "Maybe simultaneously," he admitted, pulling her close. That night, in the privacy of their new home, they became husband and wife in every sense. Ethan had been nervous, as it was the first time for both of them, but Beatrice's steady presence calmed him. They learned each other slowly, tenderly, and when they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, Ethan thought he had never been happier. The next morning, they returned to work on the store. Now they were not just builder and builder, but husband and wife working side by side. The work went faster. Other townspeople pitched in more readily now that Beatrice was a married woman. The walls went up, the roof was laid, the windows were installed. 6 weeks after the wedding, the store was finished. It was bigger than the original, with better ventilation and more storage. The front room held shelves for goods, and the back room, as planned, had built-in bookshelves for the lending library. The living quarters upstairs were small but comfortable, with a bedroom and a sitting area. On the day they opened, half of Madisonville showed up. Ethan stood behind the counter, Beatrice beside him, and felt pride swell in his chest. They had done this. Together they had taken ashes and built something better. "What should we call it?" Beatrice asked. "Kirkland General Store seems boring now." Ethan thought for a moment. "How about Kirkland and Son General Store?" She raised an eyebrow. "We do not have a son." "Not yet," he said, grinning, "but I am optimistic." She swatted his arm, but she was smiling. "How about just Kirkland, simple, classic?" "Kirkland's it is," Ethan agreed. The store was a success from the start. People came for the goods, but they stayed for the lending library. Beatrice had reached out to suppliers in Houston and Austin, and they had managed to stock over 50 books. Children came after school to read. Women came to borrow novels. Even the men stopped by to look at newspapers and agricultural guides. Beatrice did not stop building once the store was finished. Word of her skill had spread, and she started taking on other projects. She helped expand the schoolhouse. She built a new porch for the doctor's house. She repaired the church steeple after a storm. And Ethan helped her with all of it, learning more about carpentry with each project. They fell into a rhythm of life that felt right. They ran the store together during the day. In the evenings, they would have dinner, then read together in the small sitting room. On Sundays, they went to church and then spent the afternoon visiting with friends or working on their own home improvements. 3 months after the store opened, Beatrice came to Ethan with news that made his heart soar. She was expecting a baby. "Are you sure?" he asked, even though he could see the certainty in her eyes. "I am sure," she said. "Dr. Fleming confirmed it today." Ethan picked her up and spun her around, just like he had when she agreed to marry him. "We are going to be parents. Put me down before you make me dizzy," she laughed. but her eyes were shining. They spent that evening making plans. They would need to expand the living quarters upstairs. They would need a cradle. They would need clothes and blankets. Beatrice insisted she could build the cradle herself, and Ethan did not doubt her for a second. As her pregnancy progressed, Beatrice continued working but took on less strenuous projects. Ethan worried constantly, afraid something would happen to her or the baby, but she reassured him with her steady practicality. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she told him. "I am healthy and strong, we will be fine." She was right. On a warm spring evening in 1879, almost exactly a year after the fire that had destroyed everything, Beatrice gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Ethan was there for the birth, holding her hand through the pain, and when he heard his son's first cry, he wept. "He is perfect," Dr. Fleming said, placing the baby in Beatrice's arms. "Congratulations, you two." Ethan looked down at his wife and son and felt his heart expand to hold all the love he felt. The baby had a shock of dark hair like his mother and was already waving tiny fists in the air. "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked, exhausted but radiant. Ethan thought of his father who had helped him build his first store. His father who had died too young but who had taught him about honor and hard work. "Thomas, after my father, Thomas Kirkland." "Thomas," Beatrice repeated, looking down at their son. "Tommy, it is perfect." Those first months with a newborn were exhausting and wonderful. Tommy was a good baby, but he still needed constant care. Beatrice recovered quickly from the birth, her strength serving her well. They moved the cradle into their bedroom, and Ethan got used to waking up several times a night to the sound of his son crying. The store continued to thrive. Mary Garrett started helping out part-time, giving Beatrice more time to rest with the baby. The lending library became even more popular, with people stopping by just to see little Tommy and browse the books. When Tommy was 6 months old, sitting up and babbling, Ethan came home one evening to find Beatrice sketching in her notebook again. "What are you working on?" he asked, bouncing Tommy on his hip. "I was thinking we could expand the store," she said. "Add another room on the side. We could use it for larger items, farm equipment, things like that." Ethan sat down beside her, looking at her sketch. "You want to build again?" "I always want to build," she said simply. "It is who I am. Is that all right?" "It is more than all right." He kissed her temple. "I love that about you. I love that you are never satisfied with just enough. You always want to make things better." She leaned into him. "We make a good team, you and I." "The best team," he agreed. They did expand the store, working on it in stages over the next year. Beatrice designed it and Ethan helped build it, with Tommy playing nearby in a pen Beatrice had constructed for him. People got used to seeing the Kirkland family working together, the baby's laughter mixing with the sound of hammers and saws. By the time Tommy was 2, Madisonville had grown significantly. More families had moved in, drawn by the railroad that had come through the previous year. The town needed more buildings, more infrastructure. Beatrice was in high demand, and she started to train other people in carpentry, passing on the skills her father had taught her. One of her apprentices was a young woman named Catherine, just 18, whose father thought it was a waste of time but who showed real talent. Beatrice saw herself in Catherine and took her under her wing. "You are doing a good thing," Ethan told her one evening, watching Beatrice patiently explain joinery techniques to Catherine. "Teaching her." "Someone gave me a chance once," Beatrice said. "My father, when everyone else said girls should not learn carpentry, I am just paying it forward." Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The store prospered. Beatrice's carpentry business grew. Tommy grew from a baby into a curious toddler, then into a bright young boy. He had his mother's amber eyes and his father's smile, and he loved helping in the store, stacking cans and greeting customers. When Tommy was 4, Beatrice told Ethan she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with excitement rather than nervous anticipation. They knew what to expect now. They were ready. Their second child, a daughter, was born in the winter of 1883. They named her Rose after Beatrice's mother. She had blonde hair, surprisingly, and blue eyes, and she was as calm as Tommy had been energetic. With 2 children and a thriving business, life was full but happy. Ethan sometimes thought back to that terrible night when the fire had taken everything, and he could hardly believe how far they had come, how much they had built together. One evening, when Tommy was 7 and Rose was 3, Ethan and Beatrice sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. The store was closed for the day, and they had rare free time together. "You ever think about that first day?" Ethan asked. "When you walked through the ash," Beatrice was quiet for a moment. "I think about it all the time. I think about how close I came to not stopping. I had only been in town for 2 days. I did not know you. I almost convinced myself it was not my business. What made you stop?" "I saw you standing there in the ruins," she said softly. "And I saw myself 5 years earlier standing in the ruins of my family's home. I saw how lost you looked, how broken. And I thought, maybe I can help. Maybe I can stop one person from feeling as alone as I felt." Ethan took her hand. "You did more than stop me from feeling alone. You gave me everything, a home, a family, a life worth living." "We gave each other that," Beatrice corrected. "I was alone too, Ethan. I was wandering, trying to outrun my grief. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a home." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Madisonville. Tommy was showing Rose how to stack blocks, patiently rebuilding when she knocked them down, building and rebuilding just like their parents. "I love you," Ethan said. "I love you too," Beatrice replied. As the years passed, their family and their business continued to grow. The store expanded twice more, eventually taking up half the block. The lending library became a full library, with Beatrice designing and building a separate building for it. Tommy and Rose grew up helping in the store, learning business from their father and building from their mother. When Tommy turned 16, he announced he wanted to go to university to study architecture. Beatrice was thrilled. Ethan was proud but worried about the cost. "We will make it work," Beatrice said firmly. "He has a gift, Ethan. He needs to develop it." They sent Tommy to Austin to study, and he came back during summers full of ideas and enthusiasm. Rose, meanwhile, showed an aptitude for numbers and started keeping the store's books when she was just 14. In 1895, when Ethan was 41 and Beatrice was 39, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. The town threw them a party, acknowledging how much the Kirklands had contributed to Madisonville's growth over the years. Beatrice had built or helped build most of the major structures in town. Ethan's store was the heart of the community. At the party, Dr. Fleming, now quite elderly, stood to give a toast. 20 years ago, I watched Ethan Kirkland lose everything in a fire. I thought it might break him. But then this remarkable woman showed up and helped him rebuild. And in doing so, they did not just rebuild a store. They built a family, a legacy, and helped build this whole town. To Ethan and Beatrice Kirkland, everyone raised their glasses, and Ethan looked at his wife, still beautiful, still fierce, still the best thing that ever happened to him. She met his eyes and smiled, and he knew she was thinking the same thing he was. That loss had led them to each other. That destruction had given way to creation. That the fire, terrible as it was, had been the beginning of something wonderful. Tommy graduated from university, and came back to Madisonville to start his own architectural firm. His first major project was designing a new town hall, which Beatrice helped him build. Working with her son, teaching him the practical side of his designs, was one of Beatrice's greatest joys. Rose married a kind young man named David, a schoolteacher, and they gave Ethan and Beatrice their first grandchild, a little girl named Lily, in 1898. Holding his granddaughter, Ethan thought about how life continues, how it builds on itself, generation after generation. As the new century approached, Ethan and Beatrice began to slow down. They were not old, not yet 50, but they had worked hard for so long. They hired more help for the store and started taking more time for themselves. They would take walks in the evening hand in hand through the town they had helped build. One evening, they found themselves at the lot where the original store had stood. There was a memorial plaque there now, marking the location. It read, "Site of the 1878 fire." From these ashes, a family and a community were built. May we always remember that destruction can lead to creation, and loss can lead to love. "Do you remember that first day?" Beatrice asked, echoing Ethan's question from years ago. "When I asked you to tell me what the building looked like?" "I remember thinking you were crazy," Ethan admitted. "This strange woman asking me to describe something that was gone." "I was not asking you to describe what was gone," Beatrice said. "I was asking you to describe what could be. I was asking you to hope again." Ethan pulled her close. "You taught me how to hope, how to build, how to love. You taught me everything that matters." "We taught each other," she said, just as she had all those years ago. They stood there in the fading light, two people who had found each other in the ashes and built something beautiful. The town around them bustled with life. Their children and grandchildren were healthy and happy. The store, the library, the buildings they had constructed together stood strong. In 1900, on New Year's Eve, the whole family gathered at Ethan and Beatrice's home to celebrate the new century. Tommy was there with his fiancée, a smart young woman named Alice. Rose was there with David and little Lily, now a toddler. The house was full of laughter and love. As midnight approached, Ethan raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said. 22 years ago, I lost everything in a fire. I thought my life was over. But then Beatrice walked through the ashes and showed me I was wrong. She showed me that endings can be beginnings. That loss can lead to something better. Because of her, because of all of you, I have lived a life richer than I ever imagined possible. Here is to the new century, and to the family that rebuilt me from the ground up." "To family," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Beatrice squeezed Ethan's hand, tears in her eyes. "To second chances," she added softly. "And to the man who gave me a home when I had been wandering for so long." They kissed as the clock struck midnight and their children and grandchild cheered. Outside, the town of Madisonville celebrated, fireworks lighting up the Texas sky. The new century stretched ahead, full of possibility. Over the next few years, life continued its steady march forward. Tommy married Alice and they had twin boys, much to everyone's delight. Rose and David had a second child, a boy they named Ethan after his grandfather. The store was eventually passed down to Rose and David to run, as Tommy was busy with his architectural firm. Beatrice finally retired from regular carpentry work when she was 55, though she still occasionally took on special projects. She started teaching more, holding classes for young people who wanted to learn the trade. She wrote a manual on carpentry techniques, which was published and became widely used. Ethan retired from daily store operations around the same time, though he still stopped in regularly to chat with customers and help out when needed. He spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to read and telling them stories about the old days. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1905, Ethan and Beatrice took a trip, something they had never done before. They went to New Orleans, to Louisiana, to see where Beatrice had grown up. It was an emotional journey for her, visiting the places of her childhood, seeing the lot where her family's home had stood. "I have not been back since the fire," she told Ethan as they stood looking at the empty lot. "I could not bear it. Are you all right now?" Ethan asked, holding her close. "I am," she said, surprised to find it was true, "because I am not alone anymore, because I have you." They visited New Orleans, ate good food, listened to music, and celebrated 30 years of marriage. On the train ride home to Texas, Beatrice rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For coming back here with me, for helping me face my past, for loving me." "Always," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. "Always." As they grew older, Ethan and Beatrice became fixtures in Madisonville. They were the couple everyone knew, the ones who had built so much of the town. Young couples would come to them for advice. People struggling with loss would seek out Beatrice, knowing she understood. The library Beatrice had built became a gathering place for the whole community. In 1910, when Ethan was 56 and Beatrice was 54, they decided to build one more thing together. A home, their dream home, on a piece of land just outside of town. They designed it together, incorporating everything they had learned over the years. Large windows for light, a wide porch for sitting, a workshop for Beatrice, a library for Ethan, room enough for all their children and grandchildren to visit. They built it slowly, enjoying the process, remembering that first building they had constructed together. Their hands were older now, not as strong, but they still knew how to work together, how to move in rhythm, how to build something that would last. The house was finished in the spring of 1911. They moved in on a sunny April day with their whole family helping. That night they sat on their new porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and pink. "We did it," Beatrice said. "We built our dream." "We built a lot of dreams," Ethan replied. "This house, the store, the library, our family, all of it together." "Do you ever regret it?" Beatrice asked. "Losing the original store, everything that happened." Ethan thought about it seriously. "I regret the loss of my parents' things. The memories that burned, but the fire itself. No, because without it I would never have met you, I would never have had this life. So no, I do not regret it." Beatrice leaned into him. "I used to think my family's fire was the worst thing that ever happened to me, the end of everything. But it brought me here, to you, to this life. So maybe it was not an end at all, maybe it was a doorway to something better," Ethan agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one, lighting up the vast Texas sky. Two people who had lost everything and found each other in the ashes. Two people who had built a life, a family, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. In 1915, Ethan and Beatrice celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The celebration was huge, with the whole town involved. They now had 7 grandchildren and were pillars of the community. The mayor gave a speech about their contributions to Madisonville. Their children spoke about what wonderful parents they had been. Their grandchildren performed a little play about the fire and the rebuilding. Ethan looked around at all the faces, all the people whose lives they had touched, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "We have been so blessed," he said in his speech. 40 years ago, Beatrice took a chance on a broken man standing in the ruins of his life. She helped me rebuild, and in doing so, we built something neither of us could have imagined alone. Thank you all for being part of our story." The applause was thunderous. Beatrice stood beside him, her amber eyes still bright, her hand firm in his. She had aged beautifully, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with years of smiles and sunshine. To Ethan, she was just as beautiful as the day he first saw her standing at the edge of the ashes. As they grew into their 60s, health became more of a concern. Ethan developed problems with his lungs, likely from the smoke he had inhaled during the fire all those years ago. Beatrice's hands began to ache with arthritis, making it hard to do the detailed work she loved. But they faced these challenges together, just as they had faced everything else. They spent their days quietly now, reading together, sitting on the porch, playing with their grandchildren. They had earned their rest and they took it gratefully, but they still attended church every Sunday. They still went to town events. They were still part of the fabric of Madisonville. One afternoon in 1920, when Ethan was 66 and Beatrice was 64, they took a walk through town. They passed the store, now run by their daughter and son-in-law but still bearing the Kirkland name. They passed the library Beatrice had built. They passed buildings Tommy had designed and Beatrice had helped construct. Everywhere they looked, they saw the marks of their life together. "We did good work," Beatrice said, taking Ethan's hand. "We did," he agreed. "The best work of all." That evening, back on their porch, Ethan looked at his wife and thought about everything they had been through. The fire, the rebuilding, the marriage, the children, the grandchildren, the business, the community they had helped build. 42 years of life together, and he loved her more now than ever. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked, noticing his gaze. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Ethan said. "How grateful I am that you walked through those ashes all those years ago." "I am grateful too," Beatrice said, "for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led me here to you, to this beautiful life we built." Ethan pulled her close and they sat watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. The sky turned gold, then pink, then purple, then dark. The stars came out. The crickets began their evening song. And Ethan and Beatrice Kirkland held each other, two people who had found love in the ashes and built something that would last forever. Their story became legend in Madisonville. Parents told their children about the fire and the woman carpenter who helped rebuild. About love found in tragedy. About the power of hope and hard work. The plaque at the original site of the store was expanded to tell more of their story, and it became a place people visited, especially couples who were struggling, looking for inspiration. Ethan and Beatrice lived well into their 70s, still together, still in love. They saw their grandchildren grow up and start having children of their own. They saw Madisonville transform from a frontier town into a thriving city. They saw the automobile replace the horse and wagon. They saw electric lights come to their town. They saw the world change around them, but their love remained constant. On a warm spring evening in 1925, sitting on the porch they had built together, holding hands as they watched the sunset, Ethan turned to Beatrice and said, "If I could go back and change anything, I would not. Not a single thing, because every moment led me to you and to this life, and it has been the most beautiful life I could imagine." Beatrice squeezed his hand, her amber eyes shining with tears and love. "Me too," she whispered. "Me too." And as the sun set on another day, they sat together, two hearts that had found each other in the ashes and built a love that would echo through generations. Their children and grandchildren would tell their story for years to come, about the fire that took everything and the woman who walked through the ash and helped him rebuild. But more than that, they would tell about the love that grew from that rebuilding, stronger than any structure, more enduring than any building. A love that proved that from the deepest loss can come the greatest joy, and that sometimes the end of one thing is just the beginning of something far more beautiful.